I've already good time of the day, everyone. Glad to be hosting another UD interview series today. We have a very interesting guest. Ikromjon Tuhtasunov is a PhD student of political science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He studies how participatory institutions in non-democratic regimes shape perceptions of state legitimacy, which is a very you know um interesting topic and not easy to understand for a lot of us. But we're gonna definitely break it down as we talk. A native of Uzbekistan, Ikromjon came to the U.S. in 2017 to study for a master's degree in global affairs at the University of Notre Dame. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, Notre
Oh,
Dame.
okay. Where he focused on public policy regarding educational development. He also spent some time in Chile, the country in North America, South America, doing research on educational innovations. Ikram John holds BA in World Policy from the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Tashkent as well. Very impressive background and very unique background in among UD interview series guests. Most of our guests have been, involved in like business, law. We have had students who have graduated from good universities such as Harvard and Columbia. But this time we have a very unique guest, and hopefully, this conversation is going to be very fruitful, interesting. And let's get started. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing quite well. Excited about today's football match. Maybe we should call it soccer because we are in the US, but we
Yeah,
shouldn't be anyway. So exciting day overall.
yeah. I've noticed that you've been becoming very. Uh, I'm not sure if it's right to say, but popular in many ways. You've been interviewed by Kunuz and I think another media outlet. I forgot the name. How has your experience been in that, and how did it happen?
Yeah, I don't I do not necessarily consider it as anything to do with popularity. It was just someone who works at Kunos who came to the US, someone who I know quite well, asked for an interview, which I agreed. That's all what it was about, and I sometimes think it's a responsibility of citizens to express their opinion about what is happening in my country, Uzbekistan, as well as around the world. That's why it's just out of personal responsibility to express a few opinions that you've been holding. But otherwise,
Yeah, we'll definitely want you to elaborate on that down the road, but it's very interesting how you start the conversation, express our opinions. You sound like a political student, or I could tell. I could tell. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Let's start with blitz questions. Some fun questions that that don't require long answers. Do you prefer texting or talking?
I personally prefer texting, not
Yeah,
texting.
I'm assuming you're an introvert or you're an extrovert.
I'm halfway between, I would say, because regarding the first question, I think if you talk on the phone, especially, it's going to take a long time sometimes. That's why preferably just texting would be fine. And as for like social activities, I think I'm halfway in between, uh, depending on my mood, I would say.
I see, I see, I see. What's your favorite city in the U.S.?
Oh, San Francisco, by far, by far.
Francisco.
Yes.
Interesting. I lived in San Francisco for 4 years. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting city. Well, what do
It,
you like?
it has it has everything you need. It has hiking places. I wouldn't call them mountains. Maybe like there are nearby mountains for sure. Yosemite is not too far away. Lake Tahoe is not too far away. You have ocean. the climate is good. It's not too cold. It's not too hot. And the city is beautiful. Of course, it's expensive. That's the biggest downside. And housing is terrible, I would say.
But housing prices terrible or housing terrible?
Because maybe I never lived in San Francisco, but I only visited a few times as a tourist, and I was able to stay with my friends without having to pay for housing. And I think that's the reason I liked it a lot. But I think the second favorite city would be Chicago, definitely. New York is great, of course, but Chicago is a smaller but maybe better version of New York City.
Yeah, you should definitely visit Miami as well. Miami, Florida is where I live now. It's amazing. It's the summer season pretty much throughout the year. So
yeah, hopefully we have family plans.
Yeah, sounds good. Who has it easier in politics, men or women?
Men, for sure.
Men,
for sure. I in some areas, because there are more opportunities, I would say newer opportunities for women to emerge. But now, especially in academia, it's still hard. It's really hard, even to speak as a man, how hard it is for women to take important positions, whether it be in politics or in academia. But definitely, men, it's easier for men to take important positions in politics.
Yeah,
especially in democracies where you need to get people's votes to be elected. It's really hard, although it's changing. And in autocratic regimes, it's definitely the case that men who don't need votes to get elected or to take important government positions, it's mainly men.
Interesting. Yeah. So the question was whether it's easier for men or women politics. We're not trying to, talk about the gender equality or anything, but yeah, that just the reality. And is human life more important or valuable than the life of a dog? It's a little bit more of like a what do you call philosophical question, if you could.
I think the life of any creature, any living creature, is important. So, let alone dogs and humans. Like, let's think about trees, and think about how like cutting down trees affect our lives. And if you think from that perspective, you would understand like importance of any living creature, regardless of whether they are human or animals, to our ecosystem and to our living in general.
Fair enough. How many push-ups can you do?
Well, I have become so terrible at sports after I got pretty serious injury last year around this time. I was playing soccer, and I had to spend some time in hospital. So I stopped playing
That sucks.
Soccer for some time and do some exercise. So now I feel the negative consequences of that injury.
I see. Tell me one of your New Year resolutions for 2023. Just one of them, real quick. What are you trying to accomplish, let's say, in this year?
Because during the past few months, I've been too busy running around doing too many things. I think one of the resolutions is to find some peace in doing fewer things. I'm not sure because I'm managing to do that, but definitely one of them is spend more quality time with family. I have 8-month-old daughter whom I want to spend a lot of time with, but that's not always the case when you are a PhD student and you have deadlines after deadlines. So you spend some time at home, that's for sure, but it's almost like a obligation. But I would love to spend more time outside the house with my family.
Gotcha. Makes sense. If you were a politician in the U.S., just short, we need a short answer for this. Would you be part of the Republican Party or Democrats?
I have no thought about this, quite honestly.
So no answer.
Yeah,
No
I think I would need some more time to
to
make
think
that decision. But it definitely depends on the time. So for example, politics changes quite fast. My answer today would not be the
the same.
same tomorrow. That's why,
Fair enough.
depending on the time.
And what is money for you? What does money mean to you?
So money has become more important over the past few years because I have, let's say, made a family, yes, and
Family.
have become a responsible person for my family.
Hmm.
And as a PhD student, we don't get paid hell a lot. So start. I have started viewing money as more of a necessity than something indispensable, uh, something I would have gotten anyway, regardless of what I would do. So previously, I thought no matter what I do, I would get certain amount of money. But now my viewpoint has changed.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's about, let's say, finding ways to save more money and to earn more money to be able to support my family. So applying for grants after grants, regardless of whether they are successful or not. So that has been my case.
Yeah. Especially in a capitalistic country like the U.S., the importance of money is super important. Is there? Uh, uh, Quick questions. What can the Taliban build or become a legitimate government? Short answer. Can it or cannot?
So I have. It really depends. It really depends. I'm not intentionally trying to avoid straight answers, but I have spent a lot of time around the idea of legitimacy because I studied legitimacy, and it's such a blur concept. And whether you call a Taliban regime legitimate or will it ever become legitimate is
Matter of time.
is a matter of time, but also is a matter of opinion. Whether, let's say, Uzbekistan calls it legitimate might not make much difference for what it means for the US to call Taliban as a legitimate regime. That's why it varies a lot. But personally, I think they have established a government. They are able to govern, but are they doing it rightfully? Rightfully is one of the important elements of legitimate state. So there is that part of it. So partly yes, maybe, but there are a lot of open questions.
I see. Awesome. Okay. What's the best thing about the country of Chile?
Oh, people, by far. Going before going to Chile, I read an article about Chile where there was um, a really big mining company in Chile, and there was a problem where people were trapped, and they were trapped for, I think, for a number of days, and all of them were successfully rescued. But the point is, they spent a lot of time in the mining underground for many consecutive days, and they survived. And Chile is the story of Chile is about resistance of people. So I went there during summer, but because it's the southern hemisphere, it's winter there, and they don't necessarily have gas. I mean, they have gas, but it's very expensive, so people don't use it. And in offices, they will just cover up. They sit with their coats on and with extra clothes on, and they just work. It's freezing cold inside, but they still keep working, and it's quite impressive when you think about it. And I had troubles when I lived there because it was cold and I wasn't able to use the heating system a lot. But like just seeing people being so resistant and adaptable to the surrounding difficulties was quite impressive to me.
Interesting. Wow, never heard of this thing happened. Very interesting. Awesome. So that will do with the blitz questions. Let's move to the part where we talk about your education. We know that between 2012 and 2017, you studied at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy, and you acquired your bachelor's degree in international relations and affairs. Let's talk about that a little bit. How was your, education, the quality of education, your experience as a student, your social life at school, if you could, please.
Sure, I would like to start with a little earlier period of describing a little earlier period of time when I was applying for universities in 2012. I would say I was applying for a number of universities and preparing for maths, and I wanted to become an economist, or at least like a accountant, something close to it. And there was a Republican English Olympiad. So if you take one of the first three places, so first, second, and third places, you gain a chance to get accepted to a university, to a national university, without national examination. So I participated in English Olympiad and I got third place, and I applied for UVAT, University of World Economy and Diplomacy, and got accepted to the Faculty of International Relations. But if you apply in a traditional way to this faculty, then you would have to take exam in history. But because I prepared for maths, I didn't have much knowledge in history. After I started studying there, I noticed that I wasn't so competent in history like my friends, and this discouraged me a lot. I was trying to find opportunities elsewhere, trying to apply, but at the end I decided to stay. And US as a area of study was really interesting to me, and I started studying history of United States and politics, and that's how I became interested in American politics. And this motivated me to keep studying at this university and position myself as a student of American politics. And this helped me a lot along the way. I wrote papers about the US. So everything I did at the university was about US. And maybe your second question will be about how I got accepted to an American university. And this was one of the motivations, because I studied American politics. I was so much into seeing it in person, studying at American university, getting this knowledge from American professors. And I applied. I took GRE test and IELTS, and then I found this University of Notre Dame. I had never heard of this university before, and they had opened a new school, Keough School of Global Affairs, and they were offering full scholarship. I did not believe at first, but I anyway applied. I got accepted. I was so delighted, but still did not believe it. I thought it was some kind of liberal arts college somewhere in rural America, like let's say college no one heard of it. When I did my research, it wasn't that. It was bigger than that, and it was, I think it still is, one of the top 20 colleges in the US for undergraduate education. And
talking about the University of Notre Dame, right?
Yes, University of Notre Dame.
Where is it located?
It's in Indiana, and
Indiana.
It's in South Bend, Indiana. South Bend is actually quite popular in the US, but outside of the US, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very small town, and
Interesting.
I really loved.
The top 20 colleges in the U.S. in terms of like the political science major.
No, so if you're looking into ranking of universities generally, it's top 20.
Top 20. Okay, that's cool. That's really impressive.
But it's a Catholic school. It's a Catholic school, so a lot of Catholic people go there. A lot of wealthy Catholic people study there. So it's a very rich private university with a lot of resources. So we were able to take advantage of that in many ways, as I said. So they offered full scholarship. They even gave us stipends.
Oh, wow.
They financed our travels. My trip to Chile, my 3 months there was fully financed by Notre Dame. So it was a really amazing time. Even now, like comparing to my stipend now with inflation, all that, I think my stipend at Notre Dame was better.
Interesting.
And we don't have to do any teaching assistantship. We call it graduate assistantship. So it was all provided by the university. And they, during the studies, they invited really important people to give us lectures. And one of them was Dennis McDonough, who was formerly chief of staff for Barack Obama. Now he is the Secretary of Veteran Affairs at Biden administration. And like a former president of Germany and some other big names came to us to give us lectures. So it was really engaging and also, let's say, diverse set of speakers invited. And the school was positioning itself as a modern school, and they spent a lot of resources promoting that. So we saw many people from politics, from international development community came and give us lectures. So it was a wonderful experience.
That's very impressive. So that's one of the top schools apparently, and you got stipends as well as your expenses while you're traveling to Chile was covered by the University of Notre Dame, right? That's amazing. And were you also paying the tuition, or how did it work, or did you get
it was full scholarship. It was full scholarship.
Full scholarship. Okay. Oh wow. Let's talk about the full scholarship. Like, how did you get it? Is it easy to get it? Like, what are some of the steps that you could recommend some people to to follow through?
So when I talked about this before elsewhere, and one of the most common questions is, how do I find scholarships? And it's a tedious job. So you have to look everywhere to find scholarship, especially full scholarship, and there are not many. And I think the best way to do that is to go into university websites and make a Excel sheet and put down all the information there. So I used to have a list of scholarships. I did my research, and I actually came across this Notre Dame information about Notre Dame scholarship, I think on Facebook. So on social media, there are different pages promoting different scholarships. So
interesting.
In one of the pages, I saw this opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, I did not believe at first. And I did not believe that I would get it if I applied for it. But I anyway did. And so you have to follow all the requirement. So if they ask you GRE, many schools are not requiring it now. But in order to get good scholarship, you need to get GRE or GMAT. I think it's still the case, although many schools are not requiring it. And you have to prove your English language proficiency by taking IELTS or TOEFL, and you need to have good grades from your academic institutions, and also recommendation letters, because in the US, I think we can even talk about this in depth. So recommendation letters are something that can get you opportunities or that can deny you opportunities. So you really need to have really good, well-written recommendation letters by people who are in a position to give you a recommendation letter, who know you well. This is important. And also statement of purpose. I think you cannot write statement of purpose in the same way to all universities that you are applying. It should be unique in a way. I don't exactly remember how many universities I applied for, but the one that I spent most time writing was my statement of purpose for University of Notre Dame. I spent almost like 3 months, I would say.
Oh, wow.
Always tweaking, editing, making changes, doing my research, thinking about what's important to them, what's important for them to know about me, and what other things they might care in an applicant. So I spend a lot of time, let's say, tailoring my statement of purpose to their, let's say, desires, expecting that they would probably like this in me. So I think there was one section specifically where I talked about my personal values, religious values, because I thought because it's a Catholic university and they promote certain values, they care about what values other people hold. That's why I devoted that specific section in my statement of purpose talking about that.
Interesting.
So overall, following the requirements and making sure that the application is uniquely positioned for that university. And sometimes I see on social media really bad examples of people making mistakes, such as they write for example, they email professors in applying for PhDs, asking for help or guidance, and it's the same, let's say, promotional message, and in one of the sentences there's a, let's say, brackets, and it just says insert institution, insert a name, without changing that template. They just send it. And it's so bad. It's so bad. It's so ignorant that like it's like it puts you on a blacklist almost. That's why don't make such mistakes, even like small mistakes as spelling errors.
What you're saying is, the subject name has to be customized. Is that what it is?
Yeah, in some cases, yes. In some cases, it's just a template, and they don't add names, and instead of the name, it just says insert name. Even they don't look at it, so it's so ignorant and so bad that it puts you on blacklist.
It's mostly because of the carelessness and not paying enough attention, I guess, right? And you mentioned it's a tedious job to find a scholarship. How long did it take you?
So it's almost like a never-ending job, because you don't know whether you'll be accepted to the programs you apply for. That's why you're always exploring. And like personally, at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy, we studied for 5 years. And starting from my 4th year, I started focusing on applying for university. So that's when I started focusing on my GRE exam.
Basically 4 years.
Sorry?
Okay. it took you basically 4 or 5 years to be able to find a good scholarship until you really get it.
Well, I would say like a year or so, but what I'm saying is starting from my fourth year at
Mm,
the university,
okay.
I really I was looking for scholarships.
Okay. Sounds good. So just to wrap it up, good, I would say advice from you would be, it takes long to find a scholarship. So the earlier you start, the more chances you have to find a good scholarship, and starting making a list of the kinds of scholarship you have, and then plus finding out the requirements, going to university websites is another step, and then taking those required tests such as English IELTS or TOEFL, or and as well as GRE tests, right? And then getting recommendations is super crucial. A statement of purpose as well, and then you have to be customizing each and every application to a specific university. Uh, do you think that's a good summary?
Yes, and also if I were to add, don't put things in the last like don't put off things to the last minute. I mean, many of us it's fine, but it doesn't put you in a good place. That's why I try to um, start the application as early as possible, as I mentioned. So you ask for recommendation letters from your professors, and
Mhm.
it takes time. Like you can just come and say the deadline is tomorrow. Can you write me a letter?
Okay. Yeah, that could be late. Yeah, I understand. Let's also talk about. I think we haven't touched your life in at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Doctor of Philosophy. That's what you've been doing lately, right? Um, are you only focused on the studies, or are you also working at the same time?
No, uh, I have a lot of things going on. I have studies, I have my own research, and I'm a part of a research team that's conducting um, surveys, interviews with government uh, officials, public servants in Uzbekistan. So I have a lot on my plate now, and as a part of the requirement of my program, I teach or I help professors teach the class.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
so that's how we get paid, basically.
Okay. Okay. Wow. So your job at the university while you're studying would be enough for you to cover your life expenses. Is that what it is?
Yes, Urbana-Champaign is a small town. It's a college town, and it's not expensive. Let's say it's cheaper compared to other major cities to live here, especially the housing, and also food and other stuff are a lot cheaper here.
I bet.
That's why the stipend uh, I think is enough to cover, but you might need some external funding during summer, and that's why we apply for opportunities for grants
Hmm.
to support our research because you need money to conduct research. For instance, I am planning to conduct a survey in Uzbekistan, and you need expenses. So you need travel expenses. So you need funding for your expenses,
Hmm.
for travel, for doing research and other stuff.
Very interesting. I'll definitely ask about the survey that you're trying to accomplish in Uzbekistan. But then let's move to another section where we're going to talk about your career. I know that you've done a lot of internships while you're going to school at General Motors of Uzbekistan between 2014 and 20, I think, 15 for a couple months, a couple times, I guess, right? Uh, how was your experience? Was it helpful? And what was your role when you were doing the internships?
So at University of World Economy and Diplomacy, you are required to do internships every summer. starting from your second year. And it's a requirement. If you don't do it, you get expelled. It's mandatory. So many people, because they go back to their home during summer, they prefer to do it in government offices or other NGOs in their cities. But I knew someone from GM, Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, and I thought maybe I'll ask for help in getting me an internship there, because it seemed like a good opportunity to understand how the system works, to get to know people. And also in Uzbekistan, people like to say, so you really need to know how to get along with people in a working environment, and that's one of the most important skills to survive in a working environment in Uzbekistan. That was one of my goals, going to somewhere serious and learning about working like ethics, I would say. So someone I knew from General GM helped me get an internship. They did a little interview, but they accepted me. So it was a finance department where they make all the payments for the parts that they buy. And my responsibilities as an intern, like any other intern, was so basic. I was supposed to help them with daily activities, and I wasn't at first trusted with important stuff, but I had a really good mentor who actually came to the US later on, and we got to live together in Chicago as roommates. So he really helped me learn how to create payments and all other daily activities of let's say financial personnel there. And because I think what I did was good enough to lend me another opportunity to come back next year. So I was able to come back for the next summer. And the second time I was there, I think I got to do more actually. And I was able to do some of the stuff by myself. And this really helped me, as I said, to get to know people there first, and also socialize with them in many different settings, even outside, let's say, outside the work, like playing soccer and hanging out with people. It really helped me make connections with people. I know some of the people to this day, although I don't have much connection with them. And I also know how the system works. That's why I would say it was a good experience. And later on, I was able to do internship at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was a whole new experience for me, because I was some of the stuff let's say restricted, so I cannot tell all the details of my internship work, but overall I was part of the team that was responsible for let's say welcoming international guests, and doing all the organizing stuff. So this was a great experience, and it was during a time when Uzbekistan was celebrating, I think, 25th years of independence. Let's say 25th years of establishing diplomatic relationship with many different countries, and almost every day, we were invited to embassies, foreign embassies in Uzbekistan, for celebrating this milestone. So it was event after event for me during this time. And there were also some high-level, let's say, summits in Uzbekistan during that time. I was part of Islamic Cooperation Organization summit, as well as like it was also like Minister of Foreign Affairs meeting with other ministries in Tashkent. So it was a whole different experience for me during that time.
Okay, so a lot of participation of government officials was there. You attend a lot of events apparently, and that kind of helped you build connections. Do you still maintain some connections out there in Uzbekistan?
I mean, many of my friends, I should say some of my friends, work at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They are already positioned in foreign embassies now. So yeah, it's good to have connections with them.
Absolutely, especially if you're planning to build your career in Uzbekistan. Having the connections is always important. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Appreciate it. And I think we haven't touched on some of the internships you've done. I guess right, the internship at the Department of State Protocol. I think you already mentioned, did you?
Yes. Yeah.
You did.
This was it.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. You also worked as a graduate consultant. What's it called? Foundation. I think it was in Chile.
Yeah, in Chile. So
But it's in Spanish. I can't read.
Yeah, it's fine. So University of Notre Dame partnered with international organizations, and our partner organization was Enseña Chile. It's almost like a Teach for America type organization where they recruit recent graduates of colleges to go to schools and teach there. And they had they have one in Chile, and they were making some innovations in education. So in English, it's called Schools That Learn, Colegios que Aprenden. It's basically about making schools learn all the time by sharing feedback within the institution. So we were part of that, and the official position was graduate consultant. During this time, we worked for a year with this partner organization, and at the end, we made a report about how to improve their practices.
Interesting. So when you say innovation in education, what is that? Like innovation? When we talk about innovations, we usually imagine some technologies and stuff, but innovation in education probably refers to like some methodologies, like new methodologies of teaching and stuff. Is that what it is, or am I not, understanding it right way?
Yeah. So because we were not studying education the same way people in education school do. We were mostly looking at organizational aspects of it, like public policy aspects of it. So how do we organize a school in a way that the feedback is shared among all stakeholders and the learning continues as a process? So we were focused on that. So the idea was, because schools, let's say teachers and school principals, don't share enough information with parents and within each other, there is not much progress in schools. So the idea was, if teachers observe classes of other teachers and share feedback, and this cycle continues, there's going to be a learning happening all the time. And how do we organize this in a school, also in a school district? How do we help superintendents in schools make this a policy? And this was the focus. And we interviewed stakeholders in different levels and tried to understand the context. It was still very complicated, but we made a few suggestions. And the program is still going on, and I think they made a lot of progress. After we graduated, the the incoming class also did a similar thing. So the project continued.
Very interesting. Do you also speak Spanish by any chance when you were in Chile, or was everything done in English?
Previously, I didn't speak any Spanish, but the reason I spent 3 months was to go to Chile early enough, right after classes ended, and take some classes of Spanish. So that was the goal, and I did that. I wasn't, of course, fluent in Spanish. I took only a few classes within this time, but it was really interesting to understand some aspects of Chilean culture by learning, by, let's say, starting to learn the language. And because my appearance is not so different from the appearance of like average Chileans, I didn't really have hard time navigating through the city, and people would approach me talking in Spanish, thinking that I was some other Chilean.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. That I mean, knowing language is always very helpful, but I think 3 months is not enough to learn the language at a good level, I guess, right? Research assistant at the University of Notre Dame in 2019. We already touched on that. Anything you want to add to that?
Not necessarily. It was a really short stint, as I said. I helped the professor gather some data, which was in Russian.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that was in Russian. Okay. Okay, let's also talk about your life abroad. We already talked about your education and your internships. Your life abroad. Let's talk about your life in Uzbekistan first. Your social life, your career, and political, and political point of view.
So I think I had a really good time in Uzbekistan. I cannot complain. Like many people, especially students coming from other regions of Uzbekistan to Tashkent to study, usually have difficult time financially because they have to pay tuition fees and they have to earn their living, especially pay for their stay.
Yeah.
So this was a different case for me, maybe for many students at UAD. So we have a dormitory inside the university, and you make the payment at the beginning of the study year, academic year. So once you pay it, so basically it's forgotten. It's forgotten. And I also did some English teaching outside the class that earned me some money. So I was able to provide extra funding for my, let's say, living.
That's awesome.
And also starting, I think, from my third year, some family basically recruited me to help their child to study. He was attending Tashkent International School, and the family was quite wealthy. So I started living in their house, helping the kid study, basically teaching him English and other things. And so they also gave me money. So throughout my study onwards until graduation, I lived in their house without having to pay for dormitory, having extra money in my pocket, and basically living my best life in Tashkent. But I had some difficult times, of course, that should not be hidden, of course. But overall, remembering my time as a student in Tashkent always brings me good feelings.
That's good. And what about the United States of America? Do you feel like you're part of the society here? Do you feel like you're accepted? Can you imagine your life and career in the U.S.? And why? Why not?
Yeah, there are two different questions. Starting with the first one, I very much feel to be part of this community wherever I lived. People are nice. Maybe I have only lived in Midwest. That's why people I only meet people who are nice. Like
Yeah.
so far, for 6 years, thankfully, I have not experienced any, let's say, negative, uh, negative event or negative experience per se. Some people have negative shocks, but this has not been the case for me. The people I have met have always been kind, um, and pleasant to talk to.
Mhm,
That's why I very much feel part of this community,
mhm,
and I really enjoy living here, especially the nature.
mhm,
And I live in a small town now, and traffic is not bad, which is great. And we are able to walk around, especially when you have a child. It's really important, and we
mhm,
have access to nearby parks. It's always a walking distance, and you can choose which park to go. That's a great thing. So one downside is we don't have many good restaurants around, especially if you are looking for halal places. That's one downside, and you always miss Uzbek cuisine, even though you are able to cook it at home. Uh, Otherwise, and also social life. I have friends here.
mhm,
I know some of the immigrants, they find it hard to make friends here, but thankfully this has not been my case, and I have already made a lot of friends who I keep in touch quite regularly. Uh, and social life, as I said, I do some sports, although I haven't been able to do it for a while, but I used to do it with people outside my usual circle. That's why I was able to make new friends all the time, because you play soccer with new people, and that's how you make
mhm,
friends.
mhm,
So generally, this has been a great experience. And coming back to the second part of the question, uh, I like to spend some time in academia working for a U.S. institution. It's like a dream. It's not an easy thing. Many
mhm,
people, even successful PhD students, successful meaning they have a lot of academic publications, and it's really hard to get published.
mhm,
Even sometimes they are not able to get uh, jobs at universities in the US, especially top ranking universities.
mhm,
So that's why I'm saying it's a dream, of course, getting a job in the US at an academic institution as a professor. And I really like uh, my field. I really enjoy teaching. That's why that's my dream to get a job in the US. But I don't necessarily see myself as staying here for my lifetime. And there are different reasons, and we can talk about each reason separately and in depth. But overall, there's always something about Uzbekistan, maybe
mhm.
because it's my home country,
Yeah.
that attracts me, that always pulls me back.
Mhm,
And that's the reason why we are going back now in a few days to Uzbekistan, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And of course, my family is in Uzbekistan, and I want my children to fluently and quite easily speak Uzbek as native speakers. And also, uh, there's like a life purpose aspect of it. Of course, it's not easy, as I said, to work in the US in a foreign country, but uh, I would love to be in a position where I can help other people in my country solve let's say, contribute to solving some of the problems we are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So in the future, hopefully, I'll be able to go back and do some useful things for people of my country.
Awesome. Sounds great. Sounds great. So, based on what I heard, you experienced no negative, you've had no negative experience in the U.S. No negative
No personal, yeah, no personal.
for the most part, yeah, and always felt accepted. I mean, in the U.S., I mean, the general public is very accepting. I would say, I experienced the same way. Even though I lived in major cities, I could relate to it. I can, I can see you love taking walks in public parks. There's a bunch of public parks, I guess, in the town where you live, I guess, right? It's in Illinois, right?
Yes. I mean, of course, like everywhere
Mm,
else, there are places you need to avoid,
mm,
especially people living in Chicago. They
yeah,
know it, and such places exist everywhere in the US, and even the places you think are safe,
mm,
like may become unsafe at any point. And
true.
yeah, this is not the story. So this is a story everyone knows, and we shouldn't hide it.
Yeah,
There are problems, of course, and
absolutely.
we can talk about them in depth. But the point is, uh, I have never experienced anyone, let's say, saying anything uh, remotely negative, like
Mm,
to my face. Maybe they say it behind my back.
I see.
It's their problem, but to my face, I haven't. I to my
That's a
recollection,
good
I
thing.
haven't. Yeah.
Mm. Okay. I mean, I respect that you do sports regularly. I think having a good health is always crucial, and building a career, having a family, right? You play soccer, and that's how you build. That's how
Yeah,
you build friends.
I should add. Sorry, I used to I used to play
Not
soccer.
anymore because you're too busy.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. And getting a job in the U.S. and maybe working for a few years after you graduate from school, from your college, right, is your dream. And getting some hands-on experience as opposed to like learning and studying the books and materials and doing research, but also getting some hands-on experience in the field, doing stuff. That's what you want to do in the near future, I guess, right? And obviously, I could tell you love teaching. Uzbekistan always calls you back. Maybe at some point you'll get a chance to maybe go back and join some, government organization or maybe independent organizations to, bring your knowledge and all the experiences that you had and help, build something useful and valuable to the people out there, the society that you belong to, basically, and potentially help solve problems that we have out there in Uzbekistan, right? Awesome. I love the the attitude, the ambition. Wish you success in that. A couple of things before we wrap up the interview. We want to talk a little bit about some political issues that are going on, and I'm sure like people who are watching us or who will be watching us would love to know your opinion. We don't take it too seriously. It's just your opinion based on what you learned and what you've done so far. Let's talk about. Let's hear your opinion on the Ukraine's war. Uh, whose fault is it? What's going on? Maybe if you could spend a couple minutes or a minute to talk about it. Whatever you want to share.
sure. As I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, although I do study political science and I studied
Yeah.
international relations for many years now, I don't consider myself as a scholar of international relations
Yeah.
because I changed my focus to comparative politics, which
Mhm.
is quite different.
Yeah.
So, comparative politics is about political systems, how people think in different countries. As for your question, even though I'm saying I'm not scholar of IR or international relations, there is like a clear cut answer to your question, which
Uh-huh.
is one country invaded another country, its neighbor. and it's an aggression, it's an invasion. So the answer is clear cut. Russia is an aggressor, is invading Ukraine. So we should not be engaged in a game of whom to blame in a situation. So let's say aggressor has invaded a peaceful country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and all the things about neo-Nazism and other alleged problems in Ukraine are, let's say, have no value in such discussion. But there are, of course, some, let's say, prominent scholars who put the blame on the West and even Ukraine for, let's say, prompting Russia to invade Ukraine and leaving no option for Russia to do that. But I'm not on that camp, and not many people are on that camp. And just witnessing, let's say, horrible acts of war crimes committed by Russian army. You can see that the intention is not only to invade Ukraine, but also to wipe the nation of Ukraine from the surface of wars. Almost this much. That's why the opinion on this case is quite clear, and I'm not one to defend Russia in this case at all. So I think Russia is to blame. Of course, we can talk about what would have happened if there was someone else at the helm of, let's say, Russian empire at this point, or Russian army at this point. But I think it's to no avail to discuss this. So the reality is quite clear, and Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah. Thanks.
Almost, let's say, unsuccessfully at this point.
Okay, so Russia invaded another country, which is Ukraine, and Russia is an aggressor. The Russian government narrative is not legit, and then there was war crimes, and their intention is not a good one, right? Okay, sounds good. And any thoughts on China's rise and the Taiwanese conflict, Taiwan and China conflict, and what's the reflection or echo of this in the in front of the the thing that's happening in Ukraine and Russia? How does it echo in Asian countries such as China?
Yeah, I think many scholars, or at least some I know, are already calling the confrontation between China and US as the beginning of the Cold War. It's very similar to the Cold War we had between the US and Soviet Union, and some may refer to Ukrainian war as a warm war in a Cold War 2.0, I would say. That's why I think in the future it's already about the confrontation between US and China, and Taiwan might be subject of it. And there are questions about whether Taiwan is similar to Ukraine, but also is West going to stand up or help Taiwan in a similar way it did with Ukraine? So that are tough questions. So Russia invading Ukraine, another country, is not similar to China potentially, let's say, taking over Taiwan in the future, because Chinese people view Taiwan as their own, and it's a quite a different case in this case. That's why there are a lot of open questions, and what should the US do in this case? There are many proposals in this regard from different camps. Should US be more assertive towards Russia? Can it do it? Is it in a position to do that? For instance, we know it's been already a few months when alleged Chinese spy balloon was noticed in the US and it was shot down. So if China is able to do that in a clear daylight in the territory of US, how should we assess its capability in this situation, and how should we assess its intentions in the future? There are a lot of open questions, and as I said, I'm not a scholar of IR nor scholar of China.
Yeah,
but, these are the general questions that many people discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So it's not a similar situation what's happening in China and Taiwan and Ukraine and Russia. Okay, sounds good. What's your thoughts on Turkey as a country between Europe and Asia, and the recent elections that ended with the success of Erdogan, the president, the former president, and the current president of the country?
Yeah, I had a lot of conversations with my Turkish friends on this matter, and we knew that the opposition was strong, but I think one of the major shortcomings of the opposition was that it was not able to bring together all the opposition, or send out a message that's not so negative in the minds of people. So I think their job was supposed to be a message of unity. So if we are able to, let's say, if they were able to take over Erdogan's ruling, then the people were supposed to trust them that they would bring unity into the country, but they were not able to demonstrate it in their messages or nor in their actions. I think that's why they lost the elections. And even though the opposition was strong, because Erdogan offered, I think, a message of unity or some form of stability, I think people preferred Erdogan. And even before the elections, we knew that. And many people prefer Erdogan specifically because they didn't have any threats in the opposition to bring unity in the country. Because the opposition was almost everywhere, and it was really hard to bring them together. Although the Kılıçdaroğlu was able to do it to some extent. I think Turkey is a really important country in the region, with its history, traditions, and also geographic location. We cannot underestimate these factors, and also with its sheer population. And metaphorically, we speak of Turkey as a bridge between Asia and Europe, and in reality, that's true for to some extent as well. That's why I think importance of Turkey still remains high enough, and it will continue to be important. But now the tasks that the new government or the newly elected government administration of Erdogan should be to bring down the inflation with the appointment of governor of central bank, and I think he has made good decisions to get away from his old views of interest rates don't affect inflation. So he is, I think, hopefully abandoning these views and trusting established economists. So hopefully, once the inflation is taken care of, we can expect growth in Turkey's economy.
Interesting. Okay, sounds good. So you, everybody knew that the opposition was strong enough, but they had weaknesses, which was the fact that they were not able to deliver the message of unity, right? And Erdogan's offered a message of unity that was his advantage, and that kind of prompted him to get out of the woods. And yeah, I like the analysis. I definitely relate to it. And I agree that Turkey is an important country with its geography and history. It connects East and West in many ways, like and I think one of the missions Erdogan has to try to do is to minimize the inflation through different initiatives, I guess, right? But I really like this idea of like offering a unity, and I think the opposition couldn't do it. I think Ikromjon is having an internet issue. Okay. We'll wait for him to get back with us. Oh, you're back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry, I think I had some internet
Okay.
problems with internet connection.
No problem. We already hit a mark of an hour and 10 minutes. Let's submit maybe another 5-10 minutes to wrap it up. A few questions left. Alrighty. Count 3 governments that you admire from a perspective of their politics. Just 3 countries, if you could name.
It's so I would put Ukraine. Also, there are some alleged corruption allegations now. The government was able to mobilize people to create successful resistance to Russian forces. And I think,
in terms of their regimes, like I'm sure you're a pro-democratic government, right? And I mean, you study in the U.S. and obviously, I think the answer is yes. You would love to promote democracy wherever you go. But then, like from that perspective, what countries do you think are accomplishing it well? Maybe the U.S. is one of them, or maybe U.S. is not one of them. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think U.S. Can be one of them and is one of them because of stability of the regime. Even though there were problems, there were, let's say, attempts to loosen the democracy in the government. I think the government was resistant to these challenges, especially given the 2020 election. So government officials at the local level as well as the national level were able to preserve democracy despite the challenges that they faced. And I think Denmark would be on the top 3 list, definitely. And Francis Fukuyama, a famous political science scholar, famously referred to Denmark as almost like an ideal type of democracy.
Interesting.
So maybe if you are looking for a template of how to create a country, a democratic country, maybe we should look at the Denmark model or Danish model.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. So the USA, Denmark, and France are good examples of a good democratic government, and that everybody could try to learn from. Maybe even Uzbekistan, right? Okay. Is Uzbekistan a democratic country?
I think some people in Uzbekistan think it's a democracy because they think democracy varies too much across countries, that having institutions that resemble democratic institutions make you a democratic country. But it would be really hard to find a scholar who would agree with this classification. So by many standards, Uzbekistan is not democracy. And at some point in its history, I think Uzbekistan was democracy. And there were a lot of people trying to establish democratic ruling. But since its independence, I don't think Uzbekistan has ever been a democratic country.
Since the independence, it hasn't been a democratic country.
Yes, because there are certain criteria for countries to be qualified as democratic country. So there should be elections, free and fair elections. There should be contestation. And like from this first test, I think Uzbekistan fails the examination. So maybe there have been free and fair elections, but did all the candidates have equal chance of winning the election, or anyone who wanted to, let's say, put their candidacy to be elected, I think was not able to do that. And many people are trying to establish political parties, which has been unsuccessful. And political parties are only government-sponsored political parties. That's why it would be really hard, almost impossible, to find any scholar to qualify Uzbekistan as democracy. And many international rankings and many international organizations have never qualified Uzbekistan as democratic state. I might be mistaken. Maybe in the early years, yes, but and that's definitely the case. In early years of independence, Uzbekistan was more democratic. That's for sure. But no, it's not a democratic country.
Interesting. I found this resource from U.S. Mission to the Organization of American States. It's the government website of the U.S. And based on that, it specifies what a democratic country is. Democratic Charter defines the essential elements of representative democracy in very specific terms, including respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. I think is very weak in Uzbekistan, so we say no to this, right? And then holding free and fair elections. So far, I don't think it is. Do you agree or do you not?
As I said, so there is a free and fair part of it, right? So the elections may be open, people are able to vote, but is anyone who wants to promote their candidacy, are they able to do so? I don't think so, because you have to go through official channels, official parties, political parties, and as we know, 5 political parties, and outsiders are not always welcome, and it's not easy to. No one so far has been able to establish a new political party, even though there have been attempts. So the short answer is no. There is no contestation. When you look at the political leader who gets more than 80 or 90% of votes, or maybe 95 even, you can see that there is no contestation. A contested election is one of the important pillars
Okay,
Probably.
sounds good. Respect human rights is weak, so the short would be, answer would be no. Holding
So
free elections,
yes,
fair elections, is no. A pluralistic system of political parties and organizations, separation of powers is pretty weak, I guess, right? Isn't it?
yeah, there are problems with separation of power,
Mm.
of course.
So if you have to put a check mark whether it's yes or no, your answer would be no, isn't it?
Oh yes,
Okay, so
the
you
answer would be no.
okay, absolutely no. And then the other one that's solely based on what the government website is providing. This is just the criteria of the the formation of the what do you call political government, the democratic government, let's say. And then the two last ones: independence of the branches of government, freedom of expression, and of the press. I think there is a relative freedom of expression and the press, especially after the after the end of the first government and the beginning of the second government. I think there is a little bit of freedom of expression and the press, but it's kind of limited, I guess, right, based on my observations. But what are observations? If you have to put a no or yes to this one, would you put a no or yes? And short explanation for that.
Definitely, there have been changes, positive changes in how the government tried to provide freedom of speech
Mm-hmm.
and for both ordinary citizens as well as media.
Yeah.
But um, uh, but I think there are a lot of restrictions remaining, and
Mhm.
we've seen many people. Uh, one of the questions is if you are expressing your religious views publicly on social media.
That's the
Uh,
latest trend, I guess, right?
yes, is the government in a, let's say, is government uh, legitimately should the government legitimately be able to uh, put you on trial for expressing those views?
Hmm.
And the constitution says no. And
Hmm.
should we make our, let's say, laws compatible with the constitution? And the answer is yes. And is it? I don't think so. That's why I think the short answer is no, with a caveat that compared to the first administration, there have been positive changes, which should acknowledge. But overall, there are a lot of things to do on this regard. In this regard,
Okay, sounds good. So the short answer will be still no, and I think the last statement that it says is constitutional subordination of all state institutions to the legally constituted civilian authority. Not too sure about the meaning of this,
yeah.
but
So
yeah.
Syrian elected organization would be Oli Majlis,
Mhm.
um, and
Mhm.
uh, are all government agencies accountable to Oli Majlis? And the answer is to some extent, the Oli Majlis is able to, let's
Mhm.
say, bring government officials for testimony, but
Mhm.
there are no, let's say, known consequences for, let's say, not telling the truth. Maybe every government official who takes a stand on Oli Majlis tells the truth. I don't know. But
Mhm.
we've seen in democratic states, if the government official provides wrongful information to the parliament, so let's say in the case of US, if they tell lies to Congress, then they will be charged. And we've seen many instances of former or like, uh, let's say, functioning government officials being charged and put into jail.
Mhm.
That's why in the case of Uzbekistan, we haven't seen any such cases, and I don't think the accountability mechanism works well
Mhm.
because most of the laws are first written by government agencies, then passed on to Oli Majlis for review, and
Mhm.
there are only few changes, if any, made by Oli Majlis. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of institutional interest baked into these laws. That's why the accountability mechanism does not work quite well.
Interesting. Okay, so pretty much to all of the questions, your answers were no. So it's hard to consider Uzbekistan a democratic
Yeah.
country, although we'd love to finally step into this, reality finally, and eventually.
One small caveat to this. So when measuring democracy, many scholars view it as a grading measure rather than dichotomous measure. So the question is not always whether Uzbekistan is democratic or not, although it's important for political reasons. But in academia, it's more important to view this as a grading measure where is Uzbekistan today more democratic or less democratic than yesterday? So people are interested in looking at, scholars are interested in looking at the trends over time, because it's a helpful way to understand what's going on in the country. That's why maybe for next time, if we are asking these questions from 1 to 10, how do you rate freedom of speech, or how do you rate?
Question for you to answer. Okay.
And then we would be able to see over time whether this has changed or not.
So on a ranking from 1 to 10, how democratic Uzbekistan is. Let's say the Western countries are at 10. What is Uzbekistan at?
So I would give it maybe 5, maybe 6.
5, 6.
6 would be
pretty high.
6 would be quite generous mark. Between 5 and 6.
Okay, sounds great. All right, awesome. I think this is going to be the last part. Let's try to make it short because we're running out of time. We're already on hour and 26 minutes. If you could maybe go ahead and explain some of the tweets you made. You mentioned that on one of your tweets, Uzbekistan, that there's some problems in Uzbekistan that people think are problems, but they're not problems. What are they? That's what tweets. I'm translating it. I'm not like saying it and literally translating it. I'm not like saying it in the way you said it. But
so does it have any continuation?
Yeah, that was it though. I mean, you probably reposted something else and you probably made a comment on it, but then it just caught my eyes. There are some problems that are considered problems in Uzbekistan, but they're actually not problems. What are they?
Oh yes, I think the government tries to control a lot of things. Especially, people think that it's a responsibility of government to interfere in people's personal lives, and they consider it to be a problem. But that's not the problem. That's people's personal lives protected by the constitution of Uzbekistan. And there's no place, any place for the government to interfere. Maybe there are some incentive encouragement mechanisms that the government may employ. But other than that, it's not business of the government to put its nose into people's personal lives. That's I think probably what I meant there. Many people think that it's a problem the government is not paying enough attention to this, but actually it should be the opposite. It should be that the government, the people should be complaining the government should not be interfering in such things. And this is a really interesting phenomenon. Whether it's unique to Uzbekistan or other countries is another question. But many people think that the role of the government in the society should be extended, although they are experiencing the negative consequences of this interference in their everyday life. They still so for solutions they are looking for more government intervention when the solution is less government intervention.
Okay, sounds good. Another one is about subsidies. There's better ways to like implement subsidies or allocate subsidies. You just mentioned that the government has to try to allocate the subsidies more towards the public use as opposed to like companies or corporations use. If I'm paraphrasing the right way, I'm translating and paraphrasing maybe. What's your what were you trying to say there?
There are a lot of really bad things, whether they are well-intentioned or not. The government providing subsidies to big companies in the hope that it will trickle down to poorer population of the country is totally wrong. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in Uzbekistan. That doesn't happen anywhere else. So if you are, let's say, building let's say you have some amount of money that you want to spend for building schools. Then I think the best way is to allocate the money based on the income levels of people. So you may provide some amount of money for educational purposes for families, depending on their income, and rich families maybe not having money from the government and poorer families having more money, rather than equal distribution. So equal distribution is one way. It's like one of the most common ways. And worst way is giving money to companies to do that. And I think the better ways is to distribute subsidies based on the needs of the population. And also this speaks to the subsidies for electricity and water as well. So if you are a rich family in Uzbekistan, it's really cheap to use electricity. It's really cheap to use water. And you use your water to wash your cars every day, to water your plants, to wash off your expensive pavement, because it's really cheap. But people in far regions of Uzbekistan, they don't have access to water. So I think the best way to allocate would be to make water expensive. So rich people would not dare to use water to clean off their pavement, and provide some money for poor people to be able to use water for their daily usage. I think that would be ideal way to use subsidies.
Okay, sounds great.
I think in Uzbekistan, subsidies are given at the expense of poor for the benefit of rich, without actually realizing it. Maybe it's intentional. There are, of course, interest groups, and the power of interest groups has grown in Uzbekistan, and we can see it in dwellings of monopolies in Uzbekistan and many other interest groups. And this is a big problem for the development of our country.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you so much for your time and energy, and we appreciate your participation. Would love to stay in touch with you. I feel like today's conversation was more like the first half was a UD interview series, of course, more focused on you as an individual and as a professional, right? And then the second half was more like, I think it could have, what I'm trying to say is it could have been like a UD panel discussion, and I'd love to potentially invite you to one of our UD panel discussions that we're planning to do. We only did one on the subject of AI because it's one of the crucial important topics nowadays that everybody wants to talk about. But then like politics in the US, politics in Uzbekistan, and politics in general is very interesting. And I believe politics is something that I remember you saying on one of your interviews that politics is like soccer. Everybody talks about soccer, right? Everybody can express their opinions about soccer. And I feel like politics is also one of those things. And even more than that, I feel like politics is a responsibility for pretty much every citizen, especially if it's a democratic country, because democracy is built by the public, not by the government, right? And public has to try to express their opinions freely and with no fear. And that's how we, probably start making progress, even in Uzbekistan, I guess. Even though we live in the U.S., you and I both consider ourselves as citizens and part of this, the country, the community there. And I do believe like we have, all the rights and, even we don't even have to have knowledge, but then we could express our thoughts however we want to express, I guess. And yeah, I'd love to continue this conversation for sure. I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of other candidates, and we can have like maybe some debate style conversations later down the road. But it's just me trying to brainstorm on it here. Just crossed my mind. But I appreciate your attendance here. Some of the things that you mentioned were super important, maybe useful for a lot of young audience who are going to be watching this interview later. Uh, is that it is about finding scholarships. Be very diligent and have a thorough, uh, like make good attempts to really find good scholarships, and it takes time. It's a tedious job, as he mentioned. Try to find the requirements and go to university websites and take the classes. Not the class, I mean to take the tests and such as IELTS and TOEFL or JRE, and then have a recommendation letter, statement of purpose. And then be very specific about the statement of purpose and recommendation, like having recommendation letters is super important as well. Anything else that's left for you to say before we end the conversation?
I would just say stay safe.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the week. Yeah.